Hyperstitional Therapeutics, or Psychoanalysis with a Grip. By Pseudoanalysis. 1, 1890 to 2020, From Ego, Genealogy, to Trauma. Naive inside, internally represented objects correspond to other objects, beings, in a cascade of truths with gradients of falsity. We don't want this, we never did. Obscure outside, impersonal forces prime a series of machines, and or vice versa, that outwardly diagram functions that make themselves real, becoming, through bodies over time. We want this. It's all we've ever wanted. A genealogy, 1890 to 1998, is in order, one that with each date unravels into an even deeper schizo K-hole, 1890 to 1895. Freud in researching hysteria discovers that an internal perception of an event, effect, thought, or interpretation distorted through the recursive process of memory one stimulates the body through language in the same way a material object does through sense, not unlike magical incantations, and that an authority figure, like a mage, priest, or physician, can hijack this process through suggestion and crash it into itself, leading to novel somatic and mental experiences. In doing this, Freud supplants centuries of Cartesian mind-body dualism with a Spinozist dual aspect monism rooted in the body and its effects, while simultaneously reinvigorating magic as a materialist cybernetic prescription. The effect of this extends much further than a simple psychotherapy and ushers in a new golden age of the hyperreal, wherein fictions, internal narratives composed piecemeal of partial internalizations of captures of the outside, act as diagrams for functioning in an external milieu. 1899–1900, Freud publishes The Interpretation of Dreams in 1899, but due to his own quabalistic superstitions labels its publishing date as 1900, thereby producing a semi-fictional text from the future. This artifact of Freud's personal history is a kink in the form of the text, a symptom that points us to the content of the text, mainly the intermixing nature of fiction and fact and its significance to temporal ordering as found in dream work, internal fictional narratives built from mental mechanisms and constructed of parts of the outside. It is in this kink that Freud both approaches and departs the superstitious, magical, cybernetic zenith by positing dream work, hyperreal meeting of the inside and outside, as perhaps the most significant concern of psychoanalysis, but also secondary to, or overcoded by, the Oedipus complex, which he discovered in his own dreams, a discovery which leads to the privileging of the naive inside over the outside. 1972, Deleuze and Guattari, p. 9, take corrective action on this matter when they write a schizophrenic out for a walk is a better model than a neurotic lying on the analyst's couch. A breath of fresh air, a relationship with the outside world, likewise, the motif of the patient who, after a schizophrenic flash, brings a tape recorder into the analytic session to introduce an outside perspective, page 56, 312, also comes to mind. 1980. They continue, Freud, experienced as he was working with neurotics and Oedipal-level conflict and inexperienced as he was working with psychotics and pre-Oedipal conflict, erroneously interprets the Wolfman's schizopolyvocal communications, several wolves, the outside, as neurotic Oedipal and monolithic ones, one wolf, phallus, daddy, family, inside. It is in this same text that D&G compel us to make a map not to tracing before introducing the reader to a new geological strata to their thought via a first-hand account of the critically overlooked Professor Challenger's geoscientific ramblings in the aptly named Geology of Morals. 1981, Baudrillard, after critiquing Anti-Oedipus in 77 for neglecting the hyperreal, publishes Simulacra and Simulation, a short book that in being both a lesson in, form, and on, content, intense feedback, captures and copies the nature of the hyperreal by exploring how fictions have the same effects as facts, thereby resulting in a collapse of the distinction between form and content and real and fake. Over the course of the first 4 pages the book, Baudrillard provides a mysteriously unverifiable or possible unreal quote, form, followed by the famous Borges fable concerning cartographers whose map comes to replace the territory it seeks to represent, and concludes with a brief reference to psychoanalysis' weak attempts to distinguish whether a patient is simulating a symptom or suffering from an organic development, an issue which Baudrillard claims is already present in Freud's dream work, Content. 1983, Guattari, possibly grappling with notions of the hyperreal, clarifies the themes mentioned above from the Schizophrenia and Capitalism volumes while unintentionally responding to Baudrillard when he writes that psychoanalysis needs to get a grip on life, the grip it lost when it transitioned from a positivist medical model to a guru culture pushing obtuse concepts and dangerous suggestions in lieu of helping a person better live in the outside world. To get a grip could mean grappling with the hyperreal. It's around this point the concept of cartography becomes an interest to Guattari. DOS 2010, p. 263 and 391. 1989, Virilio, whose career was centered on the outside and speed as manifest in city organization and the military vectors driving it, architecture, cartography, etc., steals a glance at Felix Guattari's desk and happens to see a stack of bound papers from Guattari's 1980s post-8000 Plateaus seminars, such as his 1983 essay above, papers covered in diagrams, maps, rambling sentences, and fictional theories that interest Virilio enough for him to publish it as Guattari's third-to-last book Schizoanalytic Cartographies, a title that given our current discussion speaks for itself. 1998, the CCRU, a vague collective of alien forces resonating as 90s cultural motifs captured and smashed into the shape of human bodies, meat puppets, bodies that produce diagrams, maps, rambling sentences, and theory fictions, intensify the hyperreal into maximum signal density with their notion of hyperstition. Not representation, neither disinformation nor mythology. Hype belongs to a strain of time-warp cybernetic fiction that cannot be judged true or false because it makes itself real. This same year the CCRU meets with esteemed and controversial cryptographer and rogue geoscientist Daniel Charles Barker, who was then researching geotrauma at Miskatonic Virtual University, MVU- considered the Shadow MIT, a remote school composed of people around the globe but with strong links to the Massachusetts area. Curiously, the interview isn't published and released until 1 year later in 1999, the year Arthur Conan Doyle's 1912 book The Lost World, the birth text of Professor Challenger, is rebooted into a television show. Pause. It's here that things get weird and the timeline slips off track. It's here we need to jump around times, go back in order to go forward, etc. First, return to Freud. 1890 to 1895, Freud, in his research on hysteria, introduces us to Nachtraglichkeit or afterwardness, which designates the moment where, via fictional narratives, the present retroactively reshapes the past, thus destroying any prior determinism and opening up a new future, lines of flight. Clinically, a patient makes a self-discovery in the present that allows them to make sense of their past, deep repressed memory fragments, and therefore have more freedom in living their life. For example, here our past genealogy, 1890 to 1989, does not make complete sense until we arrive at the CCRU and D.C. Barker, 1998-99, which retrospectively aligns our memory fragments towards a sensible narrative, At the same time, it's here that the genealogy slips into a templexive loop that lends itself to uncontrollable morphological drift, distratification, deterritorialization, whatever, oozing into new and uncharted geological registers, or reterritorialization, is merely a means to be, more deterritorialization. At this point our genealogy concerned with the flat line of time morphs into a geology, archaeological dig going backwards from 2019 to 1975, concerned with the curved line of space. Genali ego, geo, alphabet or prebiotic soup. We rearrange ego, Back, into geo. Time is not a straight line, like the spine. It's a globe that spins on an invisible axis, spine minus the E equals spin. Take the hanging E and free associate, equator, equator of a globe, globe minus E equals glob, ooh-z. Primordial. The spine was once a curved loop that ossified out of jelly goop and later straightened out, allowing the human to conceptualize the spherical space of the globe. Axis is spine. 1975. Following the publication of Anti-Oedipus in English, Deleuze and Guattari travel across the globe to the east coast of the United States to run the Olé lecture tour. After a conference where Guattari shares the stage with William Burroughs, who, in his interest in sorcery, dreams, and fiction is perhaps the godfather of hyperstition and therefore the focus of much of the CCIU's research, Guattari ventures off to Lowell, Massachusetts with the editor of Semiotext T. Lowell is not far from Cambridge, home of MIT and the Miskatonic County, about an hour driving time apart, and as the legend goes, one night in Mass, Guattari stumbled into a lecture tucked away in some Cambridge square not far from the MIT campus where he found a professor rambling on about esoteric geoscience. This professor is none other than D.C. Barker. It is unclear how much of the lecture Guattari stayed for, or what Barker was up to, but what is clear is that 8,000 Plateaus was in its early writing stages during the time, and not but 5 years later the experience makes it into the text, which Barker himself cites in his interview, under the name Professor Challenger, a name change likely suggested by Deleuze. 23 years later D.C. Barker is interviewed by the CCIU and published 1 year later as Professor Challenger is rebooted for TV. 1980s, Guattari, with the help of a friend, is introduced to several high-caliber international scientists to whom he shows the esoteric and hyper-scientific diagrams he conceptualized during 8,000 Plateaus and further developed in Schizoanalytic Cartographies, DOS 2010, p. 512. The scientists don't understand and dismiss Guattari, but it is rumored that copies of Guattari's diagrams make it from French hands to American hands through Guattari's New York and California connections. One may only speculate, in addition to whether Burroughs and Guattari corresponded in Lowell, who these scientists were and where, if anywhere meaningful, on the East Coast Guattari's diagrams landed. 2016, I moved to the east coast of the United States within the Miskatonic area while on leave from my West Coast studies, whereupon a friend refers to me the case that follows in this paper. Nearing the end of 2016 the paper is rejected from several journals for being baselessly absurd wild analysis, where it then sits on my computer. 2019, while reading Thomas Moynihan's Spinal Catastrophism, A Secret History, 2019, I contact the recently revived MVU with the hopes of sharing research. This case immediately comes to mind. 2020, 2016, cars, shoes, and letting the outside in. And the inside out. The story goes like this. 5th grade boy from gang violence-stricken neighborhood is referred to in school counseling for angry classroom outbursts. We develop an enjoyable therapeutic relationship, but he doesn't want to talk about anger, he wants to talk about cars and shoes. I don't push it. I listen to him talk about cars and shoes. Cars and shoes. Cars and shoes. Then rupture. Therapist, what's all this car talk about? Patient, they go fast. If I owned them I could go anywhere I want, do what I want whenever I wanted. To my mind the sports car seemed to connect with having the freedom to act immediately without inhibition, investment of desire in spatial and economic mobility of a body, time, space, geo. Sessions later another rupture. I notice the word drive embroidered on the patient's shoes. The possibility of a Freudian pun, drive theory, amuses me. T, I noticed your shoes. P, these ones help me go fast. It's fun to go fast in life. T, are your shoes like a red sports car? P, ha. You could say that they're both shiny, red, and go fast. Though my question regarding the likeness of his shoes to a sports car could be considered bad technique, leading the witness, the fact that the patient did not resist my association and in fact provided his own link, they are both shiny, red, and go fast, seems to confirm that there was indeed a link between his shoes and his talk of cars, a link not in the sense of a positivist discovered, latent, pre-existent link, referring back to something, passive uncreative signification personal unconscious as theater, but in the sense of what the hermeneutic psychoanalysts, see Movehudi 2015, refer to as closing the hermeneutic circle, that is, connecting the dots between the data the patient provides and the ideas the therapist has in relation to the data to create some sort of plot, referring forward to something, active creative diagrammatization, impersonal unconscious as factory. Here the geo of the sports car is relocated into the ego of sports shoe through shared fiction. Creating a fiction together helped the patient feel understood, less alone, and therefore more interested in working towards something constructive with myself. The patient and I agreed that if we could continue like this we could spend some of the session outside. This introduction of outside time marks the start of when the patient began talking about the anger that brought him to end school therapy with myself, and when things start to get weird. You know, most people don't have memories of being a baby, but I do. I remember being frozen. I couldn't move. And everything was black. I could see through my eyes, they were open, but all I could see was black. It was all black. It was creepy. It was scary. I didn't like it. That's all I can really say. An odd symptom, a deep body memory. During a later session, right before I get angry everything just goes black. Is there a thought or idea right before it goes black? No. I just get angry, just like boom. Fast, recall the fast shoes/cars. What if I told you to make up a story, fiction, about the steps of getting angry, right before it goes black? Make it up. What good does that? Might not be any good, but give it a shot. Just tell me a story. Doesn't have to be real. Well, I guess right before it goes black, I think just that I don't want to do anything I will regret when I come out of it. I was really angry last week but someone brought their baby in and I knew to stop. I stopped being angry just like that. Right away. Because I knew I didn't want to hurt the baby, by accident. So, some things can bring you out of it? Yes. Like, if you were there I wouldn't hit you. You'd bring me out of it. I don't like myself when I am angry, so it's kind of nice that I go black because I don't have to actually remember doing those things. After exploring this peculiarity together through a shared fiction that lead to thoughtfulness, the patient's angry outbursts outside the therapy room reduced significantly until some gang violence-related family issues occurred which reinvigorated his acting out. Following this tragedy, the patient described a new insight. Right before I black out I ask myself what am I going to do? But the answer to the question is too scary to think about. It's easier in these moments to go crazy than it is to think about what you're going to do? Yeah, only a long time later do I think wow, what was I doing? Could you reflect in the moment instead of later? I just do it and don't look back. Ever since I heard that quote in a movie, it's my mantra, do it and don't look back. When questioned, the patient stated that this mantra was taken from the Fast and the Furious films which center on driving sports cars fast and dangerously, a sentiment consistent with the talk of impulses, sports cars, and fast shoes, not to mention the patient's fury or age. I was immediately reminded of Paul Walker, the Fast and the Furious actor who killed himself, even if accidentally, by driving a fast red car into a tree. Here Walker's fictional life becomes his real life and has real effects. While thinking about this suicidal celebrity to myself, the patient said aloud, as if responding to my very thought, Do you know that guy Aaron Hernandez? Well, he looked back. Look what happened to him. He killed himself. He should have just gone to prison, not looked back. Instead he tried to get off innocent. Now things get weird. 2016, Aaron Hernandez, Rupture of the Outside, and Hyperstition. In what is perhaps a bit of the Freudian uncanny, a week prior to the session where the patient mentioned Aaron Hernandez, a psychoanalytic theory class I was enrolled in had been discussing his murder trial and suicide, which had then just recently occurred. The class spent time proposing banal and cliché theories until the professor posed the clever theory that Hernandez's conviction for the first crime, first-degree murder, but acquittal of the second, double homicide, a strange occurrence, aroused in Hernandez the thought or feeling, if I hadn't done the first one I could have gotten away with the second. Can you imagine getting away with double homicide but getting nabbed on a single homicide? This event gave him just enough space to reflect, just enough hope to realize how hopeless he was. Hernandez could have lived out his life accepting his first prison sentence, but knowing he could have got off free for the second crime adjusted his perspective, enlightening him to what he was missing. This can be described by inverting the cliché "you don't know what you got till it's gone" into "you don't know it's gone till you got something," which speaks to the mind's inability to produce pure negation, a conflict which lies at the heart of psychoanalysis and the logic of the unconscious, one that brings us into the realm of fiction and the hyperreal. The point here is that Hernandez's subjective experience was ruptured to the extent that it led him to suicide. This is precisely the aspect of the case that the young angry patient identifies with in his own talk, completely ignorant to the fact that I had discussed the same thing in a class a week or more prior to our session. Let us revisit what the patient said: "I just do it and don't look back. Ever since I heard that quote in a movie, it's my mantra, do it and don't look back." You know that guy Aaron Hernandez? Well, he looked back. Look what happened to him. He killed himself. He should have just gone to prison, not looked back. Instead he tried to get off innocent. For both the patient and Hernandez, looking back, reflecting, would mean something terrible, or deadly. At this point, to help the patient whose symptoms had returned due to gang violence, instead of suggesting reflection as I had been doing, or trying to find the right words or symbol the patient could use before blacking out, I tried to find the right image and action in the room by asking the patient if he could simply picture my face right before he blacked out. The next week L came in and reported the following: So, I got angry, and the weirdest thing happened. Man. You won't believe it. I was getting really angry at my tutor. Ready to do something, and all of a sudden, his head became your head. I don't mean I imagined his head, I saw your face, your head, on his head, only for a few seconds, but it was very real, and it was shocking. Weird. I stopped being mad. Not because I wasn't mad, but because it was so strange. Man, like so weird, I had to take a step back and think, what the heck? So, my face helped you snap out of it? Yes. It was the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. The following months consisted of considerably less fits of rage, and when L did get angry, he tended to be able to verbalize that he was angry and remove himself from the class to take a short walk. Ultimately the patient, more stable. 2019, Fiction and the Outside. What worked here? Shared fiction, hyperreality, that catches a hold of the currents of the outside, resonating with cultural events that re-territorialize in the body of the patient and become real in their effect on the patient, hyperstition. Here we see the first decisive factor in helping the patient get in touch with meaningful content regarding his symptom and therefore regarding his recovery is the inclusion of literal outside time in the session, as well as the abstract exploration of outside talk, cars, shoes, etc. Opening up the session to the outside in this way then allowed for a fiction in the therapy room to resonate and connect first between myself and the patient and then with a shared reality outside the therapy room, the strange case of Aaron Hernandez. Meanwhile, fiction helped the patient and I develop a transference where he felt he could talk about things at his own pace while I listened. As self-psychology models show, when a therapist refrains from acting or speaking in a way that makes the patient feel threatened or in need of a defense, the patient tends to be more likely to let down the defense and naturally connect with the therapist and therefore participate in co-creating fictions which feed back and resonate with the outside and become real. This wish to co-create a fiction allowed the patient to try and make my interventions work. The psychodynamics of the useful intervention lay not necessarily in an unveiling of some hidden unconscious structure, positivist recording or structuralist signifying, representation, but in my learning how to be in a space with the patient as to encourage him to cooperate in writing a shared fiction with me through synthesis. In large, much of good psychoanalysis consists in co-constructing a functional myth or helpful lie, personal truth, in order to resolve conflicts. As Freud, 1905, points out to us, it is not that the doctor's advice really cures the patient, it's that the feeling that the doctor wants to cure the patient helps the patient feel cured. Fiction worked because, as previously mentioned, it privileged primary or schizoprocess, the word on the level of thing rather than the word on the level of representation, and schizoprocess is open to the outside. The patient, operating from the schizo part of the self, could imagine my face, a physical object, much better in that moment of rage, becoming, in the patient's words and in theory, than he could imagine a word or sentence which referred to my face, or other signifiers which, in his mind, stood in for my face. Through his hallucination, his physical tutor took on a physical look of me, rather than his tutor taking on metaphorical linguistic or metonymical traits of me. That is, the patient's process was I shouldn't get enraged because my tutor is in a state of becoming my therapist, as opposed to what a more neurotic process, I shouldn't get enraged because my tutor has traits like or similar to my therapist, and I wouldn't want to hurt my therapist. What is interesting here is that it was not necessarily my kindness or intelligence that made my presence to the patient therapeutic, but rather precisely the shocking nature of my image appearing in an unexpected place. It was a shock, what Raka, 1982, or Guattari, 1996, terms a rupture, that pulls the patient out of his experience, which was also imperative to Hernandez. A little bit of the outside gets in and the patient, and the therapist, gets a grip.